I'm making this video because I've been feeling dismissed recently for my dislike of the results of the election. Like, the only reason that I could hate Trump for any reason is because I'm some upset blue-haired liberal or that I hate America. So for my own sanity, I'd just like to set the record straight as to why I don't particularly like Donald Trump and I'm not happy with the results of the last election. If you're not a fan of political content, you can keep swiping, go to the next video, whatever. But I am tired of this assumption that I don't know what I'm talking about. So here's this video. Section 1, Misconceptions. I supported Kamala Harris in the last campaign, and before anything else, I would just like to say she lost. And I don't want to make this video in an attempt to place the blame anywhere else other than where it belongs, which is her and her campaign staff and the Democrats as a whole. We lost. But I have seen some misconceptions bandied about the last couple of days, and I would just like to address a few of them. It's been said to me many times on Twitter and Facebook the last couple of days that Kamala lost because the economy is doing bad. I just think that people think the economy is doing bad, mostly because I don't think people really realize what the full implications of the statement, the economy is doing bad, means. What is their citation for a lot of these claims? Well, look at gas prices, look at grocery prices. Now, I can't lie to you, gas prices are expensive, groceries are expensive, but that's not a good snapshot or a reason to suggest that the economy is doing poorly. In fact, it's not even a good snapshot or reason for most people to suggest that their own personal finances are doing poorly. Now, I am an idiot when it comes to personal finances. My parents, my mother specifically, will tell you that first. They have had to bail me out a couple of times, even in the last couple of months, right? But I'm not going to blame that on the economy. I'm going to blame that on my own personal choices. All of the assessment that I have seen done in the last couple of days completely ignores the fact that we went through a global pandemic the last 4 years. I'm going to say that again for emphasis because I need you to understand what that fully means. We went through a global pandemic for the last 4 years. The effects on the global economy, every nation's economy that had any amount of cases of COVID, was large. So when we talk about prices, when we talk about the economy, when we talk about unemployment, it doesn't make sense to address ourselves prior to COVID. COVID was an economic depression on a major scale. Look at the Great Depression from 2008. The effects of that economic depression lasted for 5 years after the fact. It took, 5 or 6 years to come down off of that global economic depression. It makes more sense to compare ourselves to other countries. People typically use the G7. The G7 is 7 nations that are heavily industrialized. We should look at how these nations handled everything after COVID and how we compare to them now. Here's a graph listing unemployment rates between 2000 and 2023 among G7 nations. If you'll notice, right around COVID, we went from being the 3rd lowest unemployed nation in the G7 to tied for the 3rd highest unemployed nation in the G7. Take a look at that graph from 2020 back down to 2023. We went from being the 3rd highest, right, back down to being the 3rd lowest. We're back down to roughly around pre-pandemic levels of being at 3.8% unemployment. The target that the Federal Reserve aims for is 5%, so we're under the Federal Reserve target. Here's a graph listing GDP growth among G7 countries from 2019 to 2023. If you'll notice, around 2020, there's that huge dip. Again, COVID, and you see everyone else coming out of that. America has rebounded the strongest. Compared to 2019, our GDP is up 5%. Here's a chart showing average earnings or wages for hourly employees, adjusted for a bunch of different types of inflation. America is at an all-time high for real wages. I've also heard it bandied about recently that the Biden administration and Democrats at large have abandoned the border, just left it wide open for any yahoo to be able to walk through. This year, twice, 2 pieces of legislation were axed in both the House and the Senate. What were these pieces of legislation? Well, they were bipartisan border bills. Bipartisan meaning that the Democrats were happy to sign off on it. What was the border bill? So what they were planning to do was cap the amount of entrance or crossings of the border. If it got over 5,000 average a day, in the course of a week. After that, the border is closed until they can process through many of those applicants, and then the border can open again. I've heard people call this a minimum, that minimum 5,000 people are going to cross through the border. That's wrong. Right now, there is no cap to the amount of people that can cross over the border. This places a cap on it, okay? This places a clear, defined cap, and it also allows for the shutting down of the border. It was a co-authored, bipartisan bill. Democrats agreed to sign on to that. Democrats agreed to legislation that would have closed the border. That happened. So what happened to the bill? Donald Trump went online and panned the bill, spoke to senators and House representatives to try to get them not to vote for it. And he succeeded. Twice. Why did he do this? Because he wanted to run on immigration as an issue for his upcoming election. Democrats proposed a bill that would allow for the closure of the border. It would cap the amount of crossings per day, and Republicans shot it down. You cannot tell me that you are serious about the border being closed or you're serious about any border security if you're going to axe legislation like that because you want to be a permanent victim and offer that as a running campaign platform piece. It doesn't even make sense. Even with that piece of legislation in place, you can still run on immigration as an issue. You could still get in and place stricter restrictions on the border. They didn't do that. They don't actually care about people crossing the border. They cared about using it as a bludgeon, as an issue, in order to get voted. Section 2, Trump's policies. To be clear, I don't think he has any. What he has done is made very sweeping, wide claims about fixing the economy, fixing immigration, fixing everything, basically. What he hasn't done, or hasn't said really, is what policies he's going to try to get pushed through the legislative branch to try to get any of this action done, achieve any of his stated platform goals. And the ones he has talked about are pretty dumb, so I'd like to talk about a few of those right now. Tariffs will not fix our economy, especially not the way that Donald Trump is suggesting that we use them. He wants to impose blanket tariffs on entire imports of countries. Not a good, not a singular item. He's not targeting anything, he's targeting a country, and he wants to place blanket tariffs on them. A tariff is a tax placed on an import that U.S. companies have to pay. U.S. companies have to pay these tariffs. What does this mean? It means that it is necessarily inflationary. Why is it inflationary? Well, now, instead of only having to pay the price for the material, the wood, the aluminum, the plastic, you also have to pay the price for the material and the tariff tax on top. Essentially, your inputs for your manufacturing have become more expensive. Companies typically pass a lot of that increased price on to the end consumer so that they can maintain their profit margins and stay open as a company. So what does Trump think will happen if he places tariffs on entire countries? He thinks that a lot of manufacturing in the United States will become stimulated. But it's a really dumb way to stimulate American manufacturing. Instead of incentivizing American manufacturers to be able to lower their price to match foreign manufacturing, it incentivizes American manufacturers to stay where they are, and foreign manufacturing gets raised up to that level. It's not any cheaper for anyone. The end consumer is now less able to purchase a lot of these goods. It hurts our economy. Less dollars are going into the American economy. On international relations, Trump does not make us look strong. Trump salutes North Korean military troops and then fails to get them to stop doing nuclear testing. In fact, whether or not he's cognizant of it or not, I think he ends up kowtowing to a lot of these foreign leaders. Right now, the American government is trying to use every bit of leverage they can over Israel to reach a peaceful resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. The ideal end goal for the Biden administration is a two-state solution with Hamas out of Gaza and a Palestinian government residing over the West Bank and a possibly either the same or different one presiding over Gaza. Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have already been in talks since prior to the election day. Trump's position on Israel is going to be allowing the Israeli government to do whatever they want, likely to push all of the Palestinians in Gaza into the Sinai, and then allow Israel to officially annex the settlements in the West Bank, taking more land away from the Palestinians in the West Bank. As far as the Ukraine war goes, right now the Biden administration is providing aid. Let's take a side note real quick. When I say aid, I don't mean US dollars. This aid that people are talking about, I think they get the wrong impression because it's spelled out in dollar amounts. What this military aid mostly is decommissioned guns, decommissioned ammunition, decommissioned vehicles, communications equipment. Regardless, America, via these aid packages and NATO, has allowed Ukraine to stop the Russian offensive. The Russian advance has essentially stalled, and there hasn't been very much movement on either side. Trump said he'll have that whole war figured out, done and dusted, within 24 hours of being back in the White House. I'm going to quote him on that because it's quite possibly the dumbest fucking quote I have heard him say. That's not true. There's plenty worse. So, how does he plan on doing this? We don't know. Actually, he hasn't said anything about it. What he has said, and this is a quote, he said, I can't give you those plans. If I give you those plans, I won't be able to do them. Poppycock. What possibly could you be talking about that you wouldn't be able to enact? Here's what I think the plan is. 24 hours after being installed into the White House government, Trump is going to get on a group phone call with Vladimir Zelensky and Putin. And he's going to say, everybody stop where they are, and let's work on a more permanent ceasefire deal. The effect of everyone stopping and just kind of sitting in place means that Russia gets to take, essentially, 20% of Ukraine. Trump would be giving 20% of the Ukraine to communists. I'm not joking when I say that. There are North Korean troops on the ground right now fighting on behalf of Russia. This guy, who has said so much about Marxist and communist ideals, is actually going to give land in Europe to communist parties, essentially. I can't think of any joke that will make that more funny than it actually is. The light's on now. Obviously, Ukraine, in response to this, is going to say, no. Why would you give up 20% of your own nation? About 13 femtoseconds after Zelensky says that, Trump will be on Twitter saying, Ukraine does not want peace. The next day, he will announce that we are pulling all aid away from Ukraine and just letting them figure it out on their own because they're too war-hungry. He'll use Zelensky not wanting to give up 20% of his own nation as the excuse for pulling back all of this aid. Again, 20% of a nation to communists. Trump is probably going to give 20% of a nation to communists. Deportation. Trump wants to deport 11 million undocumented immigrants that are currently living inside the United States. Gone. No other conversation other than get the fuck out. Which you can feel how you want about that. What I find funniest about this is that he rallies against the government spending money so much, completely ignoring the fact that that's going to be super fucking expensive. Side note, he wants to give tax breaks to all American citizens, which I'm not, totally against. But then he also wants to spend a fuck ton of money. It's called deficit spending, okay? Whenever you hear a Republican rally against deficit spending, it's exactly this, right? He wants to cut tax receipts coming into the US government and then spend a whole fuck more. He wants to deport all these people based off of the idea that most of them are violent criminals. Disregarding the fact that FBI violence statistics for the year 2023 came out, and violence has gone down. This is not cohesive to me with the idea of them being violent criminals. Regardless of the drop in crime, as I mentioned earlier, it is going to be very expensive. The American Immigration Council states that at the low end, this is probably going to cost $88 billion annually. The government would have to build detention centers, the government would have to pay all these new employees, the government would have to do the legwork to track down all of these illegal immigrants. Immigrants also pay a lot of money into state and local taxes through the forms of property tax and sales tax on certain things. One estimate said that there was $29 billion worth of state and local tax paid out by illegal immigrants in various states, providing about $22 billion into Social Security and $5 billion into Medicaid. They're also about 5% of the labor force in the United States. I mentioned earlier that the unemployment rate is about 3.8%. I think it's at 4.1% as I am recording this today. I'm not entirely convinced that we are going to fill all of those gaps in U.S. production. I'm not saying that we should absolutely open the border and let anyone cross as they want. I'm very against that. I think a border is something that creates a country. One thing I do believe is that if you come to America, you can become the greatest version of yourself that you can anywhere on the planet. I would like to think as a nation we would be able to facilitate that for immigrants instead of taking it all away for all of them, regardless of any circumstance. Smaller points. Here's just a couple of things that I want to hit rapid fire. Cutting down the barrier between church and state by mandating that the Ten Commandments be present in all classrooms. He said that he wants to deport college protesters. It's a policy point on his website. He wants to deport college protesters that protested for Palestine. You have the right to protest in this country. I don't care if I agree with you or not, but you have the right to protest. Cutting back any funding for renewable energies and placing it all into fossil fuels or things that will pollute our environment. The only silver lining to this is that he might go with the nuclear option, like just doing nuclear energy, which isn't as bad, but I really would like to keep solar panels around. Cutting funding for schools across the board because he thinks that they're too woke. If you think that they're too woke, there's other ways that you can get around that. Don't cut government spending on schools. Education is one of the pillars, core pillars to us as a country. Section 3, Monarchy. This section is going to be quick, but it's one that provides a really good amount of fear in me, so I find it important to include here. With the results of this election, Republicans have control of definitely the Senate, definitely the White House. There is a conservative lean in the Supreme Court, and it's possible that they could have control of the House as well as this week rolls to an end. If the House goes Republican, that is fully all three branches of our government, all with strong allegiances to one man, Donald Trump. Let us not forget the Supreme Court ruling from a couple of months ago that said that the president has presumptive immunity from any actions taken within the official capacity of the executive. If you can explain to me what the bounds are on the official actions of the executive, I would like to know. It's likely that there will be incredibly few to no checks and balances on almost anything that this guy wants to do. If he wants to repeal the 22nd Amendment and give himself a third term, a senator will probably draft up a bill for him. Is a news station speaking poorly about him? Well, why not just launch some investigations into these people and their ties to foreign governments? This man who tried to overturn a United States election, first by trying to get a false slate of electors passed, and then by inciting a riot at the Capitol, he is now going to have a lot of power. Possibly some of the most power that we've seen in the modern age. If something is said or done that disagrees with him, he attacks it. What does that mean for your rights on free speech? I don't know, but it does make me very scared. So, why am I so upset? I'm upset because there are no words that can be said that will change the mind of a Trump supporter about him. And that's not an exaggeration. There are no words, no actions that can be done, short of Donald Trump going to your house personally and taking a shit on your pillow, that will change your opinion of him. I'm upset because I know that in February 2024, people are going to post pictures of the gasoline prices and saying that Donald Trump did that, completely ignoring the fact that gasoline prices today are at the lowest that they have been since Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm upset that abortions could legitimately receive a federal ban in the next 4 years. And if you hear this and think, oh, that can't happen, it's going to the states, I'll remind you, it's looking like all three branches of the government fully are going to go to the Republicans. If there were a federal level abortion ban introduced into the legislative branch, the Supreme Court probably won't find any issue with it. If there is an abortion ban written up, he will come out in support of it. I'm almost positive. But I'm mostly upset because I don't think people are being honest. It's not about the economy. It's not about immigration. If you actually cared about any of those things, you would do some research about what's happening in the government as a whole regarding these things. I think most people just cared about hating liberals. You have this idea in your head of someone with blue hair in Seattle or Portland, and they're outside crying because of the results of this election, and you finally get to stick it to them. That's why most people voted the way that they did. And I would appreciate if people were just honest about it. It would give me some sense of, like, cold comfort, because Donald Trump has the chance to have very, very long-lasting effects with the results of this election. And long after a lot of the people that voted for him retire or pass away, I'm going to be the one left behind footing the bill. So, at least be honest about it. Or don't be honest, and I might be dead anyways because I'll be under 30 feet of water due to global warming. Who knows?